Hi, everybody. It's Cindy here, and this is the fourth and final part in my grief series I've been doing this week. So I just want to touch on a few kind of extra things, special circumstances, and things like that, and answer some questions that have come up. One is, how long does grief last? And the bad news is, as far as I'm concerned, is it really lasts the rest of our lives when we miss someone. The good news is that the research shows that the worst part of grief, like the enormity of it, for most adults anyway, is a couple of years. For deaths really, really close to them, for the most intense part. There is a 1 year myth that if you can just get through the first year, then everything will be fine after that. And that is a myth. It is a myth because there's nothing magical that happens the day after the first anniversary of the death that suddenly makes it easier. Although some people say to themselves, okay, I've gotten through all the firsts, the first birthday without them, the first anniversary without them, the first Christmas without them, the first this, the first that. And so some people feel better because they've made it through the first and think it'll be easier now. And for some it is. But for some it's shocking when year two, feels equally difficult in those times. So it depends on you and your own, and how much grieving you've done, how much you've addressed the issues directly versus denied them or ignored them. So a lot depends on how you do your grief work. And then there's complicated grief. There's complicated situations. Actually, one of the complicated kinds of grief is when there's been multiple deaths. For example, this can be losing several people at one time, like in a car accident where 3 or 4 people die all together, a house fire where a family dies all at once, things like that where there's, more than one at one time, or where there's, grandma dies 1 month, 3 months later the cousin dies, 5 months after that your spouse dies, 6 months after that where you're having more than one significant death a year, a calendar year, is considered multiple deaths, which complicates things because the intensity is just, overwhelming with more than one. And each one needs to be individually grieved. You can't lump it all together and just to, make it easier. So you really need to treat each death individually and grieve them individually and respect the process that you have with each unique person in your life that has been deceased. But when there's multiple deaths, it just complicates things. Other kinds of complicated deaths are those that are disenfranchised. Disenfranchised means they're not really acknowledged as valid of deaths or whatever. Some examples can be like pet loss. Some people think it's weird if you are really broken up when your dog dies. I am an animal lover. I'm a pet person myself, been through pet loss myself and with friends many times, and it can be just as real as losing a family member because they're often like family members to people. But some people don't understand that or relate to that, and so they may go, well, why are you acting like so broken up because your cat died, or whatever. So people can have kind of an insensitivity to it sometimes. Another kind is when a person miscarries a baby or even has a stillbirth. For some reason, there is a belief around this that if you didn't know the baby, you didn't know it, the little person, that you can't really, it shouldn't be that hard. And this is the opposite of true. Part of what is wrong, what is difficult when someone miscarries a baby or has a stillbirth or a very, very young little person die, is what isn't going to happen, what we are not able to do. We cannot raise this baby. We will not know this little person like we wanted to. It's a real loss of dreams and a loss of a relationship that didn't have much of a chance to develop. And so that's part of the complication, but people often really grieve privately when there's been a miscarriage, that sometimes people don't even tell people when they've miscarried. So that's another way it gets disenfranchised, is the people themselves don't even act like it should be a big deal or that it should be something they share with other people or whatever. Other disenfranchised griefs, maybe if you've had a deep conflict with someone or estrangement from someone and then they die. People may go, well, you haven't talked to him in 10 years anyway. What are you upset about? And really, actually, grief with someone that we have a big unresolved issue with can be far more difficult to find peace in than those that we have loving, healthy, good relationships in. Others are ex-spouses. If my ex-spouse, died, I'm sure I would grieve, and I don't, I don't regret divorcing him. We've been apart for 5 years, but if he died, I would probably have some pretty strong feelings about that, and that might be confusing to some people since I am no longer married to him. So that's another example of kind of some deaths that can be disenfranchised. So not acknowledged, not given the respect sometimes that is needed and appreciated. So, and there are more examples, but those are just some. So multiple loss and disenfranchised grief. Let's see, what else complicates grief? The more roles the person played in your life, the harder it is, right? So if this person was your best friend and your spouse and your business partner, there's more areas of your life to miss them, right? So if they were your greatest confidant and then you ran a business with them and you had a marriage with them and raising kids with them and all these things, the more roles they played in your life, the harder, the more complicated grief can be. And then the secondary losses that come from the death of a person. We've addressed this a little bit earlier in the week, but sometimes people lose their homes, for example, because they can't keep up financially anymore without the spouse. So that's a secondary loss besides the spouse, besides the person. So the more secondary losses you have, do you lose the business? Do you lose the house? Do you lose the car? Do you lose your best friend along with losing your spouse? That kind of thing. The more other things that go with the death, the more complicated grief can be. So complicated grief just requires more kindness and patience with yourself, more understanding with yourself and those around you, and probably even more time to manage things. So then I wanted to talk about the ambivalence that some grieving people experience. Whether you're the griever or you're trying to support someone who's grieving, it's important to understand about ambivalence in grief. What I mean by this is that grieving people often look like they're impossible to help, impossible to please, because here's an example. Sometimes when people are grieving, they just desperately want to be left alone. Leave me alone. I don't want to talk about it. Please don't mention their name, kind of thing. But then other times they're desperate for companionship. They're lonely and like if they could just talk to somebody or spend some time with somebody. And so you may call them and support and go, can I come over? Do you want to go out? Can I do anything for you? And they go, no, like 30 times. But on the 30th, then all of a sudden they'll be like, could you please call me because I'm lonely. I'm desperate to talk. And then you go, wait, haven't I tried that like 10 times? So it's, and then you yourself, if you're grieving and you're doing that, like, why do I shove people away from me? And then I'm like desperate for them to pay attention to me. That's grief ambivalence. It's a part of it. It's that seesaw, that roller coaster we've talked about where we need one thing and then we need the other and then we think we need the other and we just don't know what to do with ourselves. Another way that we can be ambivalent as grievers is we can be mad about somebody saying something to us about our grief, or mad if people don't say something. Like if you mention the deceased person and you share a memory with a grieving person, people tend to be thankful for those. That tends to be very affirming to them when people will still talk about the deceased loved one. However, some people, don't want to hear their name right now, or don't want to reflect right now, or just find it triggers so much pain right now, they don't want to do that. And so you go, well, what should I do then? How do I help this person? Which kind of day is it? Does she want to hear about him, or does she not want to hear about him? So there's just, sometimes it's super hard to know what to do. And it's hard to understand ourselves as grieving people when we have that kind of ambivalence that we show. So other times, grieving people will avoid their grief, deny it, avoid it at all costs, pretend it's not happening. And then other times they will dwell in their loss and really get fixated upon it for a stretch of time. And so they think they're going crazy when they waver from one way to the other. And you might think, if you're trying to support someone who's grieving, think they're going crazy, but they're not. They're grieving. They're just grieving. So understand that ambivalent kind of conflicting ways that you approach your grief is also a very common part of it. And I would ask you to just stay as present with yourself as possible and go, okay, this is where I'm at today, or this is where I'm at this hour, and I'm going to respect it and do what I can with this mood I'm in, what I need right now. And then in 3 hours, it could be a whole different ball game. Okay, so it's just very difficult. Okay, so surviving grief, surviving the death of somebody we love. Oh, another kind of complicated grief I did not mention that I really want to, because this has come up recently, is suicide. When someone suicides and you're grieving, some people, that can be a disenfranchised grief too, like, oh, we're not going to talk about that. Nobody's going to talk about that. We don't know what to say about that. Oh dear, that's embarrassing, and blah, blah, blah. And grieving people are really hard on themselves about a suicide. Why didn't I know? How come I couldn't stop this person? It's very complicated when someone chooses to take their life. It's just very, very complicated. It can be religiously complicated for some families. It can be so difficult to understand. And then people who want to be supportive don't know what to do with you. They don't know what to do with you. So, again, very important to be gentle with yourself and recognize that is an extreme other complication. Another complicated kind is when there's murder or freakish accidents, violent killings. And then the younger a person is, the more shocking and unexpected the death is. That can be more complicated than your kind of normal aging or illness, the 95-year-old person in the nursing home that finally slips away in her sleep. I mean, things like that aren't as complicated for most people as accidents, murders, military actions, suicides, babies dying, little children dying before their parents, even adult children dying before their parents. Seems out of order. Those are all complicated situations and require extra sensitivity, probably a longer grieving period, and more intense work to get through it. So I guess the last piece I want to say is that, grief, as I've said all week, you must respect yourself in your grief and know that you're unique and you're going to do it your way. And as long as you're not harming yourself or someone else, it's probably okay what you're doing. And just ride the waves. You do have a choice. You did not have a choice about the death of your loved one or loved ones. We don't have a choice about that. But you do have a choice in how you're going to live the remainder of your life. And our loved ones would never want us to suffer. They would never want us to suffer. They probably miss us too if they're in a state that they can do that. And they would want you to be happy, healthy, and go on living. I say to grieving people all the time, you are still living. So live. Do your best to live while you're still living, because we still have a life here and we're meant to enjoy it, and we can choose. We can decide for ourselves, are we going to let this end the joy in our existence while we're still here, or are we going to move beyond it and have a positive outlook about our lives? Um, anyway, despite this terrible loss. And I know it's difficult. I mean, I know it is. I've grieved many people as well, um, certainly. And I know it can be very challenging. But life, how we live our lives, is a choice. That is a choice for sure. So I hope you choose to live and enjoy your lives as much as possible, with as you're respecting your own grief process and acknowledging those feelings that are real and true and difficult, and making all the adjustments that you need to make because you've had somebody close to you die. So anyway, it's Friday night, and I wish you a happy weekend. I have a splendid weekend ahead of me. I have a date tonight, and tomorrow I have a book signing for my Goodnight Africa book in Atchison, Kansas at the Muchnick Gallery from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. So if you're local, if you're around there and you want to stop by and say hello, I would love to see you. That would be great. And then Sunday is Mother's Day, and I am a mother, and I get to spend time with both my kids because my son lives in the area near me, with me actually, right at the moment. And my daughter's internship finished this week, and she's flying in from New York City for a couple of weeks, and she gets in on Mother's Day. So what better gift is that than me getting to be with both my kids for part of the day? So I hope you are also going to have a very special, wonderful weekend. And thanks for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye.